for the first time ever in the history of the show, more than 8 years here, we discussed the Detroit metro area's cash flow real estate market. Al and Mike, welcome onto the show.
Thank you for having us, Keith. We're very excited to be on here, and we are definitely listeners of your podcast for many years, so we're excited.
I really appreciate the following from the both of you. You know, people have some correct conceptions of Detroit, and people also have a lot of misconceptions about the Detroit metro area, as I have learned, and a lot of that has to do with geography. I love discussing this portion here about the geography. One of my degrees is in geography. I think a lot of people know that Detroit is in southeastern Michigan. I think some of the misconceptions start with, first of all, Detroit is in the eastern time zone, not the central time zone. It's not on a Great Lake. It's on the Detroit River between Lake Erie and Lake St. Clair. And the thing that blows a lot of people away is that it is adjacent to Windsor, Ontario, Canada. And to travel from Detroit by either tunnel or bridge to get to Windsor, you actually go south from Detroit. Detroit is a significant place, not just historically, but it still is today. It is the 14th largest MSA in the United States with about 4.4 million people. Between 2000 and 2010, the population dropped, but in the latest decennial census between 2010 and 2020, it grew a little over 2%. So it is a growing place, but that's sort of what I think about as the overview geographically for Detroit and its magnitude today.
Yeah, I think you touched on some key points there. The misconception and the conception of Detroit. It's funny that you brought that up because when I have these introductory calls with newer clients that I'm, getting to know and they want to know more about Detroit, one of the questions I ask them is, what is the first thing you think of when I say the word Detroit? And I remember for years when I first started asking this question, I used to hear war zone or ghost town or all these crazy things. And I would say probably 4 years ago is when I started hearing growth, Motor City, steady, and I started hearing these great positive things from clients, and I seen that shift starting to happen.
It's unbelievable. The rents that used to be, $1,200 or $1,300 downtown, to $1,200 or $1,300 a month, is now $3,000, $3,500. And it definitely trickled out to the city suburbs and into Metro Detroit.
Real estate investors care about that long term. We buy a property with the tenant that's in it today just as much as we buy a property with the intent or the expectation that 24 months down the road, when that initial tenant vacates, we have a reasonable expectation that there will be another tenant that comes in and can pay the rent. So that all comes back to the economic sectors that you're starting to talk about. And, when people think about Detroit, they often think about Ford or GM or some of the major auto manufacturers first. So why don't we start there?
Tons of workers that work in these factories, that work in these office buildings, and Detroit being the headquarters. And those are a lot of our tenants. We have the blue collar workers, some of the white collar workers. And, when we're looking for a tenant, those are who are living in our homes. The school teacher, the worker that works at a factory, the engineer that works at Ford. So, our turnaround of tenants is wonderful because we also do pick the right neighborhoods that attract, our idea tenant to rent the house.
The tech industry has really took off here over the last about 5 to 7 years. And we've been seeing a lot of the millennials that have been moving from the suburbs into the downtown area. And also to touch on that, the health industry. I see tons of applicants that are tied to the health industry here in the Metro Detroit.
You have Henry Ford Hospital, you have Detroit Medical Center, Beaumont Health. These are, hospitals and organizations that employ nurses to workers in the hospital, to the staff.
Yeah, we've been talking about economic sectors. I discussed geography earlier, and one sector that's really important to Detroit is distribution. When you think about the geography and the links to the Great Lakes that Detroit has, this makes it more feasible to do a lot of business and trade. All the cities that are on the Great Lakes that Detroit's easily tied to, it costs about 1/12 as much to move goods over water as it does land, and all those other connected cities on the Great Lakes include Chicago and Milwaukee and Cleveland and Buffalo and even Toronto. So you can understand Detroit's strategic importance from a distribution perspective, and that's really important because distribution jobs are locally tied to that geography, and therefore the people that work in those jobs can't be outsourced to somewhere else. So Detroit is well positioned that way. But you touched on the medical. That's something a lot of other people don't realize. Recently, Detroit's their hospital sector was ranked 4th in the nation. And, medical, that's that sort of sector that, sometimes that's more concentrated in a metro area rather than some others that are dispersed across a metro area. So do you have neighborhoods that are particularly tied to some of these sectors, including medical or other ones, in you making that neighborhood selection for what makes a good long-term cash flowing property with a rent-paying tenant?
One of the cities that comes to mind immediately is the city of Warren. It's one of the largest cities. Yeah, it's one of the largest cities all over Metro Detroit, and it's tied to a lot of the tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 suppliers. You'll see a lot of manufacturing coming out of the city of Warren. It's also where they're located with the GM plant, and a lot of employment, like I said, is from that field out there in the city of Warren. And I see a lot of success renting to tenants and having a lot of success in the city, buying and selling properties in the city of Warren. Okay,
now that you've talked about Warren, just tell us about, how far out from the center of the metro that you might buy and just that outlying geography.
If we use downtown Detroit as a focal point, I would say we're anywhere about 30 to 40 miles centrically around the city of Detroit.
Yeah, so you have I-75, I-94, and 96, which, connect all these cities to where the jobs are at, whether they be downtown Detroit or some of the Metro Detroit areas such as Detroit or Southfield or Troy. So it's very accessible for people to get to these jobs. And that's one of the things that we look for when we're buying the home. Is it accessible to major freeways, to employment in the downtown area or other major cities that have a lot of the employment? That's a deciding factor when we're looking at homes.
I get a lot of clients, hey, how far is this city from downtown Detroit? Or how far is the office from here or from there? And I would always say it's probably around 15 minutes. So Mike brings up a great point. The accessibility from all these highway standpoints to getting over to the properties or to the employment is roughly about a 15-minute drive.
We are the largest point of entry for Canada. So there is we have tons of trucking logistics companies that are out here. It's amazing. So we have 2 bridges, a tunnel that allow for incoming transportation and visitors from Canada ingoing, outgoing. And like I said, it's the largest point of entry into Canada from the United States is Detroit, Michigan.
You, the listener, might be wondering just what the cash flowing sweet spot neighborhoods look like and what their character is. We're going to describe that next. You're listening to Get Rich Education. We're talking about cash flow real estate investing in the Detroit Metro. More when we come back. I'm your host, Keith Weinhope. There is upward pressure on rents. And you can make this actionable at our sister website, gremarketplace.com. This is where you can leverage my industry contacts to get started with rental property. I own properties with a lot of these same providers across different U.S. states. Most of these properties, which I've actually never seen in person before. And how can I have the confidence to own rental property without ever having seen it? Well, for one thing, I partner with these turnkey real estate companies, which you can do as well. I'll see you over there at GRE Marketplace. Welcome back to Get Rich Education. We're talking about a subject that we have not talked about before, cash flow real estate investing in one of the largest Midwestern markets that there are. We're talking about Metro Detroit here. And oftentimes we think about a market, but as we know, as cash flow real estate investors, that often comes down to a sub-market where we have that cash flowing sweet spot. So with that in mind, can you talk to us about the character of the neighborhoods that you do your buying for investors in?
What we try to target is beautiful tree-lined street that are uniformed, and we even get into some pockets of Detroit that have these beautiful Victorian style character homes that are all characteristically shaped differently, and it just brings a lot of unique value also to these properties. These tree-lined streets, when you're driving down and you're just looking at every house shaped differently, one thing that I always hear clients saying is, oh man, if you were to put this street on my neighborhood where I live, these homes would sell for millions of dollars. And that's a line I would hear all the time. But overall, when you walk even into one of our properties go through an aesthetically pleasing renovation that are all up to city code that meet a certificate of occupancy. So plumbing, HVAC, electrical, windows, roofing, all have to go through a certain certification in order to pass and be able to place a tenant in there. And we do that for you on the front end.
Pulling up to a home, we want to put ourselves in a resident's shoes and say, would we want to live here? Is this a nice street? Then walking into the home, you walk into a newly renovated property, the tenant wants to live there. Then I put myself in the investor's shoes. I say, would I buy one of these homes for $110,000, $105,000, $120,000? And I say, wow, I mean, this is just a great situation. You have a great home, great area. I know we haven't hit on this topic yet, but with great returns. So you have a brick home that is, something that, like Al said, you put it in the city of LA. I mean, you're selling it for $1 million or more, So that's exciting to us. And we always want to put ourselves in the resident's shoes as well as the tenant shoes, as well as the, investor shoes.
All right. So what's typically in your buy box is, just correct me if I'm wrong, it sounds like a B-class area. Oftentimes it's a renovated, detached, single-family home with a purchase price of $100 to $120K.
Yeah, I would say that sometimes, you even get up to the point where you are in some A neighborhoods and you're in the 130 to 140 range. Now, would you say that's right around accurate?
I would say that's absolutely accurate. Keep it south of 150. You're very safe with us. But our sweet spot, like you just said, Keith, is probably that $120,000 range is where we do a lot of our sales.
And these are very nebulous terms in real estate: Class A housing, Class B housing. But what would you call Class A housing in these areas that you're talking about? Describe that.
So good point. Just like you said a second ago, I believe that everybody has a different definition of classifications. But really what dictates the classification is also the market, because a C-class neighborhood in, Metro Detroit could be different C-class neighborhood in Milwaukee or LA or whatever the case is. But here in Detroit, when you're talking A-class, it's mostly centric towards homeowner neighborhoods, mostly dominated by homeowners. You'll see maybe a very small mix of renters. But you'll see a lot of what we call pride of ownership is what I like to call it here. And you'll drive by and you'll see that mostly in A-class, but when you get into a nice B-class also street, you'll see that as well.
When I think about pride of ownership, oftentimes that can show from the street level. I know that you offer tours for investors there, so investors could see that on that level, or they could peruse something like Google Street View. And I think about pride of ownership and some of the subtle signs. I think, all right, well, what is the type of car that one might park on the street or in their driveway? And if one feels, safe enough about parking a good car outside overnight, that probably says something about the safety of the neighborhood. That doesn't tell you everything. And are the lawns mowed? And, do people pick up trash around the neighborhood? So can you just tell us more about your buy box? I mean, you spoke a little bit to the character and what you avoid earlier, but can you speak more to that? Some of those tangible pride of ownership things in these neighborhoods?
We want to be in an area that's, definitely north of $1,000. So that also attracts a certain sector of the market that, the teachers, the nurses, the blue collar and the white collar, workers that we want to bring into our homes. Our buy box, is generally in the, that lower $100,000 range. where we feel that, you know, the returns are there, the value is there. We feel that, you know, these homes are, you know, the brick on them. We look at what would it cost to rebuild with the brick today?
Right.
And
Absolutely.
you're like, wow, okay, if I was just to brick this home, it's going to cost me $30,000 to $40,000. So the rebuild cost, that is something that Al and I talk about often. We're like, how much would this cost to rebuild this 1,500 square foot, 3-bedroom, 1.5 bathroom home with a basement and a garage? And Al and I look at it, we're like, hey, we're upwards towards a $180 to $200 per square foot mark to rebuild that home. So, you know, you're looking, you know, $250,000 plus to rebuild that home nowadays. So we look at it from that factor, and then, you know, the demand from a rental standpoint in that area. Then we look at the fact that, you know, this is an asset that is in demand always for rent, no matter where the market's at. You know, sometimes there's adjustment on rental rates, but we just feel that, you know, we have a home that's always going to, you know, be in demand for someone to live in because of the area, the rental. And that's why we just feel that Detroit and Southeast Michigan is a jewel and a gem that a lot of people, when they find, they love it, you know.
Regardless of the market.
Regardless of the market, it's in demand.
Well, you talked about some of the remodeling standards at the beginning of the interview. You mentioned the rents of $1,100 to $1,200 and the price points up around $120K. That right there meets the old 1% rent to value threshold that some people like to look for, engage with their investments. And you're talking about how the replacement cost is potentially double of what the sale price of these homes are. You might see the replacement cost reflected on an appraisal as well when it comes time for the investor to go ahead and line up their financing for that property. How has it gone with the financing and the appraisals for investors?
We've had a pretty good success rate. Overall, I haven't had, I mean, especially with this market that we're dealing with right now, I can't remember the last time I've had an appraisal come under. So I feel very confident in where we are price point wise and where our appraisals are coming in at. There are times, of course, there's some meat on the bone as well when an investor picks up a property. I've seen plenty of times over the course of the last couple of years where there's still some equity into the property as well when that appraisal comes back.
If you want to learn more about this and learn more about the metro and the neighborhoods they buy and see photographs of the properties and see the cash flowing pro forma, you can do that at gremarketplace.com/Detroit. That's where you can learn more. It's been really interesting opening up this big market in the upper Midwest that we've never talked about before. Thanks so much for coming onto the show.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much for having us.